right, so in this session, we're going to talk about parent and child rights. Please know we are not lawyers, so this is not any kind of legal advice. You should think of this as an overview of these legal issues, maybe even more of a historical perspective on these issues. Okay, so first of all, I want to start with reading a quote to you guys from the U.S. Constitution, a Reader, which was edited by the Hillsdale College Politics faculty. And this is what they say about natural rights. Natural rights exist prior to any government. Thus, government is not the source of rights. Rather, governments are created to secure natural rights. So for us today, the question is, what natural rights are we concerned with? And we are concerned with our ability to educate our children. So where do those natural rights come from? We're going to see that they come from the Judeo-Christian scriptures. So I want to read to you guys some of the places where we see this. And Deuteronomy 6:4-7, we've already read part of this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. So that is, a direction given to the nation of Israel, but to the parents, obviously, they're talking about at the family level when you're sitting down and rising up. So we're seeing that directive is given to the parents. Proverbs 1:8-9 says, Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Indeed, they are a graceful wreath to your head and an ornament about your neck. So this is actually so important to God that children learn from their parents, that he's instructing kids even, the sons and the daughters, to value their parents' instruction. Psalms 127 says, Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. So if you think about it, children are given to parents, right? They're not given to governments. And then lastly, Ephesians 6:1-4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you, and that you may live long on the earth. So again, this is focused to children, that it is important that they are listening and learning from their parents. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And again, Deuteronomy helps us to understand how parents can do that and instruct their children. Now, before we get into a lot of these court cases, I just want to mention about interpretation. So there is no all-encompassing list of natural rights that humans have, which the government needs to protect, okay? Our Bill of Rights does a good job of that, but part of it is that when things are in question, okay, our courts are used to interpret those laws and interpret those natural rights. Is this a natural right? Is it protected under this law? If it's not, they go through all of those things, and that's what our courts are for, okay? So I want to go through and show you some of these Supreme Court cases. The first one is Meyer versus Nebraska, and this was in 1923. And this court case basically ruled that it is the natural duty of the parent to give his children education suitable to their station in life, okay? So some of this might be, like, for example, the Amish might say, we don't need to educate our kids all the way through high school. Up to a 6th grade, education is sufficient for their life, their station in life in the Amish community. So some of these court cases dealt with issues like this, but this was what they ended up ruling. Another example of a court case is Pierce and Society versus the Society of Sisters. This was in 1925. This court case basically says, very similarly, that states cannot force children to attend public school only. And this is a very popular saying that I'm going to read to you next. The child is not the mere creature of the state. Okay? Those who nurture him and direct his destiny have the right, coupled with the high duty, to recognize and prepare him for additional obligations. So again, it's saying the natural right and the duty is on the parent, not the government. Another example of a court case is Wisconsin versus Yoder. This was in 1972. It basically said that parents have a right to direct the education of their children through homeschooling or even vocational work. Okay, so it expands the educational to the choice of the parent. Here's another example, Washington versus Glucksberg. This is from 1997. This basically said that the Constitution, and specifically the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, protects the fundamental rights of parents to direct the care, upbringing, and education of their children. Okay? And Cornell Law School, on one of their websites, they kind of describe this a little differently. So they say that in a long line of cases, we have held that in addition to the specific freedoms protected by the Bill of Rights, the liberty specifically protected by the Due Process Clause includes the right to marry, to have children, to direct their education and upbringing of one's children. So they are specifically trying to list out and name some of these rights. Troxel versus Granville is a court case that was in 2000. And this kind of declared two things. The first was that the Constitution permits a state to interfere with the rights of parents to rear their children only to prevent harm or potential harm to a child, okay? And again, we saw this with the whole, safe adults concept. Sometimes the parents are the ones that are abusing or harming their kids, and so somebody needs to step in, right? So this is where the states are then given power to do that. The problem is, this goes back to the interpretation. Now what we're seeing is that if a parent won't affirm a child in their new transgender identity, that parent is now being considered harmful to the child or potentially harmful, okay? So now we're starting to see how even though these court cases may have sided with parents for years, now they're starting to be interpreted differently. The second thing that this court case says is that between parents and judges, the parents should be the ones to choose whether to expose their children to certain people or ideas. Okay? And parents get that, right? That if you've got your kid at school and they're teaching your kids something about sex education that you think is inappropriate for their age, you know that. I can step in, I can write an opt-out letter. My kid doesn't need to be exposed to that. We naturally see that as parents, that we have the right to do this. The problem with Troxel versus Granville was that it actually opened the door for states and judges rather than the federal government to apply their own rules to parent rights. So it went from a fundamental right that is now can be limited by the state, okay? So where the federal government was saying, yes, you guys have all these natural rights, but we're saying that the state can interfere if there's some kind of harm, well, that's putting the power then in the state to say, well, we deem this harmful, and you can't do this, or this, okay? So it opened the door for that. Now, I'm going to read to you guys a few things that this guide, Back to School for Parents, this is a great guide. It was put out by Family Policy Alliance in conjunction with Focus on the Family. And I want to read a couple of things to you just so you kind of understand how this is working today. First, they say that every single state recognizes in its own state constitution that it has a duty to provide public education, and every child has the right to be educated. So again, this is put in place so that if you have parents that are neglecting their kids or not educating their kids, that duty resides within the state, that they will provide that then. They will provide education. But that's also why we see some of those other court cases that are saying, you can't force it on the kids. Parents are allowed to homeschool their kids or do vocational education with their kids, things like that, okay? But so it's recognized by each state, they've got this duty, it's their job to provide that. The fundamental authority of parents is so powerful, courts have had to create a constitutional doctrine that would give schools the authority to make choices on behalf of students when parents are not present. This doctrine is called in loco parentis, which is Latin phrase meaning in the place of the parent. And if you think about it, in some cases, this is really good. If you are not present at that school and your child has an emergency, the school has the power to say, we're taking that child to the emergency room without asking the parent, okay? So a lot of these things were put in place for very good reasons. The school has to have that authority in place of the parent to make decisions like that. The problem is we're seeing this is now extending to other things, especially if the school has those healthcare clinics and things like this, that they still have that power then to make those decisions. And lastly with this, you do have the absolute fundamental right to direct the education of your child, but sending your child to public school is considered a choice. If a school isn't violating the fundamental rights of your child, schools have broad discretion in what they can do because parents always have the option to leave. Now I hear you because there's a lot of single parents out there, there's a lot of parents that are struggling to make ends meet and they're both working full time and they don't see that it's possible for them to get their kid out of public school and to put him elsewhere. Even though you might not feel like it's physically possible, from the government standpoint, that's your choice. That's your freedom and your right to choose to put your kid in that public school. So what happens afterwards is up to the public school, okay? And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So what we see with this court case, Fields versus Palmdale School District, the judge, Reinhart, ended up saying that the Meyer-Pierce, so those were two of the court cases that we looked at just recently, those rights that you get from that does not extend beyond the threshold of the school door. So in other words, parents have no constitutional right to prevent a public school from providing its students with whatever information it wishes to provide, sexual or otherwise, when and as the school determines that it is appropriate to do so. Okay? And this was a court case in 2005. So what we're seeing is that our government recognizes the power and the right remains with the parent, but as soon as you put your kid through that school door, that school now has your parental rights and authority. Okay? And the only time when that school would be in violation of something is not if they are teaching your kids something that you disagree with, but it's actually if they are violating the child's natural rights. Okay? So we're going to go over what does that mean when the school violates the child's natural rights and how you can step in. But first, I just want to reiterate this because this is important to understand, okay? You have the natural right to educate your child. However, if you choose to send your child to a school, whether it's public or private, you're giving that school your authoritative power over your children. As long as the school is not violating the child's natural rights, they can do whatever they want, okay? So there are certain things to help protect the parents' rights, but what really they're protecting is your right to then watch over and take care of your child to make sure that their rights are not being violated. Oh, I'm sorry. See, I'm a little ahead of myself here. Okay, so the first thing that does help protect the rights is called the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. This is a federal law. This gives parents the ability to advocate for their child's rights within the classroom. Okay, so in other words, you have a right to educate your child however you want. If you send them to the school then, okay, you're trusting that school to do the right thing, but you as a parent have a right to review that and overview it so that they are not violating your child's rights. And the way that you do that is you can write opt-out letters for specific lessons or for surveys. You can review the curriculum. You can review lesson plans. You can observe the classroom. You can request notification for certain things, like when the child's personal information is going to be sold, if the child needs to get a physical exam, if the child's required to take sex education courses, okay? So these are ways that you're given the right to essentially keep an eye on what's happening in the school to protect your child's rights. Now, this federal law, Family Educational and Privacy Rights, is very similar. This is a federal law that gives parents the right to inspect educational records of their child and instructional material that relates to the child. Local schools are responsible for establishing the appropriate procedures for parents to access this content. So you might find that you go to a school that's fairly open. Sure, you want to review these curriculums? Here you go. We'll set this up for you. You know, here's our requirements. You might find some schools that this is really hard to do, okay? They might really be pushing back. They might make it really difficult for you to review the curriculums. They might even charge processing fees, whatever it might be, okay? So it is up to that school district and how they handle this communication. Now, one of the ways that this is a little different from the federal law that we just looked at is the school records, okay? That this gives you the right to then look at the school records. This also includes library records. So you can actually request to see all the books that your kids have been checking out from the library too, okay? Okay, so as I promised, let's talk about what rights your child has, and then these are the things that you want to look for to see if the school is violating these. So the First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So, to just summarize some of these things here, okay? What this means is your child has the right to religious freedom. Okay? They cannot be forced to act against their beliefs. Oh, sorry. Your child also has the right to free speech. This means that they are allowed to share their religious views. Okay? They are allowed to share their views on life in general. They're allowed to share their perspective. This is not an open door for your kid then to belittle other people, to put them down, to instigate others. So I don't believe that. It's not an open door for it. But they do have that protection that if somebody asks them, or if they get into conversations with people, or they want to, engage in a great conversation, they have the right to share their views and their perspective. They have that right to freedom of speech. They also have the right to remain silent. Okay? They can't be forced to say things that's against their conscience or against their religious beliefs. So these can include things like those pronouns. Okay? If there are school policies that say that kids get to choose their own pronouns and everybody's going to respect that, if that goes against your child's conscience or against their religious beliefs, they can't be forced to do that. The same thing with those sex education classes and doing those role playing. If that's against their religious beliefs or their conscience, they can't be forced to do those things, okay? So if you feel in any way that the school is violating any of those things for your child, that's when you can step up, and we'll talk about what to do then if you do feel like the school is violating these rights. Also, Title IX is a federal law, and Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in schools. So this was originally meant to help women to have equality in the schools, equality of facilities, equalities of sports, and so on and so forth. So your child has that right as well, that they have equal opportunities to do things, equal right to facilities, and so forth. But I just want to talk a little bit more about Title IX. So each presidency, what we see is that, again, the interpretation tries to change a little bit here. So specifically, during Biden's presidency, he tried to expand sex to include gender identity. This has been rescinded. This does allow school to provide separate facilities for different sexes as long as they're equal. So in other words, this is basically saying you don't have to allow transgendered students to use the boys or girl room based on their preference of the day, you can provide a separate transgender bathroom as long as those facilities are equal to the male bathrooms and the female bathrooms. So that's what this bill is basically saying, okay? Same thing within sports and things like that. As long as you're giving every student the opportunity to be on a sports team, and all, males and females or however they identify, as long as they're all equal, that's fine, that's allowed, okay? Now the problem is, in New York, we have what's called the Gender Bill. So the Gender Bill is the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act, and many of you may know it as the Bathroom Bill, because what this does is this makes gender identity or expression a protected category under New York's human rights laws. So where Title IX creates a standard of equality, where it can be separate but equal, Genda actually says that you can't stop somebody from using facilities based on their gender identity. So whereas Title IX is basically saying the school can have 3 bathrooms, a transgender bathroom, a female bathroom, and a male bathroom, New York is saying, no, if there's a boy who feels like a girl that day, you can't stop him from walking into the girl bathroom. Okay, that's what New York's Gender Bill does. Okay, so let's talk about when you think that your child's rights might be violated. The first thing to do is to contact the school to notify them that you think that their rights have been violated. Make sure that if you are doing a phone call, you record it. Let the person know that you're talking to, that you're recording it. Make sure you save copies of any emails that you send. But let the school know and say, my child came home, they said that this happened, I believe that this is a violation of their rights, explain what right you think it is, and say, can we talk about this? Now, if the school is unwilling to listen, okay, we recommend that you get a lawyer to write a formal letter for you. This doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to court, but it does tell the school that you're serious, okay, because it's a formal letter written from a lawyer. But be aware, though, you may end up in court about it, okay? That's how these things are decided, is through our court system. The judges look at them, and then they decide, yes, that is a natural right, or no, it's not. It doesn't apply under these laws, or it's not protected by these laws, or whatever. And that's what we're seeing right now. A lot of the questions that I get is, well, is this going to be happening, or is this going to be happening? We don't really know until we see how our courts are interpreting these things. However, I think we can see from that brief history I gave you of the Supreme Court cases, we can see how things are starting to change, and we can see how the interpretation of laws and natural rights are being essentially kind of redefined and reinterpreted based on the culture, okay? The other thing that we recommend is just making sure that you assess your ability to homeschool or to choose different schooling options, because again, if the school is unwilling to listen, or it's deemed that, yep, you gave the school your authority, that's what the school's going to choose to do, then find your other options. And I know this is difficult for a lot of people. Grandparents can homeschool, so that's why it's great to see so many grandparents here. They love their grandkids. Oftentimes they want to help. You can have a neighbor or a friend homeschool, especially if they're already homeschooling. They might be willing to take on your kids as well. There might be other schooling options in your area, so just make sure you know what your options are, look into that, and just be aware. Just kind of have them in your back pocket. Even if you still choose to keep your kid in public school, keep them in your back pocket and aware of what your options are. Every state, this is also a child right, every state says that a minor has the right to seek permission from a court instead of their parents. Okay, this is super important, all right? Because many activists and organizations are all too happy to walk your child through the court process instead of having your child come talk to you about these issues, okay? So, for example, this young lady, her name was Yaley. She was encouraged to leave her parents' house and transition to a man. Her mother had lost custody of her and was only allowed to visit her daughter 1 to 2 hours a week. And Yaley, soon after all of this happened, committed suicide. Now, please also be aware that California is the first state in the nation to create a sanctuary state for transgendered youth seeking gender-affirming medical care. Okay, so oftentimes, if you reside in another state, and you go to a neighboring state or something, states respect other state laws, okay? Not sanctuary states. Sanctuary states say, you come here and don't worry, you can do whatever you want. We don't have to respect the laws of the state that you came from. So that does start to change, like ages of when kids are allowed to do certain things, when they don't need parental permission and consent for things. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so let's summarize this session. You have the right and the responsibility to direct the education of your children. If you send your children to school, though, the school has in loco parentis. You do have and should exercise both child rights and parental rights, so be aware of those, and I do highly recommend that the Back to School for Parents guide. That is a really good resource that has a lot of information in it, so I do recommend that. Okay, so at this time, do you guys have any questions about these things? Yes?
What happens if a school district says they don't want to follow what the state is telling them to do? With having the transgender bathrooms and all that?
I'm sorry, you mean like if a school says they're not going to let a boy who thinks that he's a girl into it, then what ends up happening to the school? So yeah, that is a complicated answer because a lot of things can happen. The federal government and even the state can start pulling funding from the school. So there's a lot of different consequences then that can happen.
But in some cases, the funding may be a lot less than the lawsuits if something happens.
Sure, you're right.
So the school district would be making money by not taking the money, actually saving money.
Yeah, so that part, I don't feel comfortable answering too much. I do know that there are certain things that the schools get threatened with stuff. They'll lose funding for things. They can certainly be, brought through the courts and sued and all that stuff. And some schools end up having that. I have heard that a lot of schools, once things start getting heated, they often will comply with whatever needs to be complied so that they don't have trouble. But I don't know, could a school ever be shut down? I don't know to the extent of that. Again, we're seeing these things happening through the courts, and we don't really know the full extent, because this is really the first time that people are really challenging schools, other than the whole evolution creation debate and can schools really teach this or not. This is really the first time that schools are really being super challenged in this way and brought to court and things like that.
And maybe just say this also includes private schools, Christian schools, not just public schools. Any schools that receive funding from the government can have that funding removed.
I asked specifically at the school board to the board members, several of these things that we're talking about, and they basically told me we are going to do what the state tells us to do, or we will lose our positions. So that tells me that we need to flip these school boards if they're telling you that. And it's your taxpayer, it's your money that's paying this too. So even if you don't have kids involved, it's the taxpayers that can, they need to start speaking out too and saying, need to know what's going on. There needs to be more, we need to make them aware somehow, I don't know how, for accountability and transparency. My thing is just really we need to be transparent and get it out there and make these schools, because they also told me we had an issue in Owego that there was different people using the bathrooms, different sexes, and basically there's no accountability, nobody knows the policies, so I'd like to have them just be more accountable and transparent, come out with some kind of transparency policy on the curriculum, so the parents, they're totally unaware, they're clueless right now, they just don't know what's coming up. So just to have, try to make awareness and get the word out there, going to your school boards and telling them that they need somehow to be more transparent in exactly. And, oh, another thing, sorry, I forgot about this. They told me we had an issue come up with a health teacher. They do not know, the board or the superintendent didn't even know what was being taught. They didn't even know the survey that was being, shown to the kids. It wasn't brought to the parents first. So things like that, they need to be more transparent. There needs to be some kind of transparency because people don't know what's happening.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a lot more about the school boards and all that type of stuff in the last session. But yeah, absolutely, school board members have a lot more power than they think that they do. And so it is definitely super important. But yeah, it's good points.
I have a question of the school board too. I was wondering, how much power they actually have, because again, just being able to, we elect them, so we really could have more say in what's going to be done, and also with the agenda bill. When was that passed?
That's a good question. I think it was fairly recently, like 2017
So
or something.
so it's
Yeah,
okay. So
Yeah.
it's not been it hasn't been like because once the bill's passed, then it has to be decided how it's going to be played out, and that hasn't been made law yet. I mean, nobody's really knows how that's supposed to be played out yet. So everything's up in the air. So the thing that I was just wondering about the school board, how much power they really have, and can they decide in their own districts what they want to do? So then that gives the people the power.
Yeah.
Again.
Yes, the school districts can decide. They're the ones that choose the curriculums for the school. A lot of school board members are going to make you think, no, they're just complying with what they're told. They have so much more power than that. So yeah, in the next session, we'll talk a little bit more of that, the breakdown of the government powers and responsibilities and stuff. And yeah, as far as the agenda bill, again, there's a lot of things that get put in place, and we don't really see how they impact. Well, I guess let me say this. You can have a law that gets written and put into place, and then you can have everybody that conforms to it, and it's what it is, right? Or you have people who say, no, I disagree with this, and they fight back, and then that's when it goes to court, and then that's when we start to see the interpretation of it, where we start to see either our government is saying, yes, these are natural rights, and they need to be protected, or they start saying, like, nope, you're not allowed to do this. So yeah, it's through those courts then that we actually end up seeing how these things are interpreted, how they're going to be applied to daily life, basically. Yeah.
So I have kids in the public school and I work in the elementary school, and I have seen not too much so far that's come through, but just even this past week, I had an art teacher who was doing a project where she read a book, and it was very just that small little thing that comes through. What can I do? Obviously, my job can be on the line depending on how I respond. I don't really know what I'm supposed to do. Do I just, speak kindly to this person and just kind of point out things? Like, how do you go forward? Because
Yeah.
it's not at like a school board level. It's not that kind of thing. It's just, individual choices of teachers who are just kind of going along with things. And
Yeah, I think part of that is, first of all, to remind the faculty and staff at the school that the parents really are responsible for their kids, and that we are in place of that authority when the kids are here, but really our authority to educate the kids that are in the building come from the parents. And so I would encourage everybody then, if you're going to do something in the classroom, send a notice home to the parents. This way, when the parents find out that it happened, there's no backlash on you, but that's also respectful to the parents that you're giving them notification. So I would encourage them to do that type of thing, because both that protects the teacher and it informs the parent, and it respects that relationship of saying, okay, we're going to be doing this. So I would definitely encourage staff to do that. I would also say, and I don't know how you feel comfortable with this, being an advocate for the parents at the school. Say, wow, do you know that the parents, don't know this? And ask parents, do you know that this is going on? Do you know that these books were read? It's not so much that you're a whistleblower, but that you're respecting the fact that your authority in that school is derived from the parent. And so parents have the right to take the school or teachers to court and say, you shouldn't have done that, or you didn't notify me, or whatever it might be. And so it's a way to, I think, just help protect people. And like you said, being totally transparent. I think that is really important, to just be a voice of transparency there at the school and reminding teachers. I think I talk about this in a little bit. If you're telling kids to keep secrets, or you're trying to keep a secret from somebody, the moment you're trying to keep a secret, there is usually no good that comes from that, right? So if a teacher is not willing to notify parents or be open about their curriculum or what videos they're showing the kids, there's something wrong, and that needs to be addressed anyway. Parents need to be notified. The teacher needs to be corrected in that sense and say, well, you need to be more open and honest about what you're doing in the classroom, because that can be hurtful for everybody. You don't want their job on the line. You don't want the kids confused. You want to respect the parents. So I know that's not an easy answer. I mean, the situation's not easy, but hopefully those are some helpful ways to maybe think and direct your conversation with people within the classroom to make some of those things the goal and the focus.
And one of the things I was going to say is, before I got into ministry, I worked in the public education system. And in 2013, I had applied for a position at the Vestal School District as a phys ed teacher. I got hired. And as I was getting ready to go to the school board, at that time I wrote a personal blog. There's just a personal blog, it was online. And one of the articles I wrote was the biblical perspective on homosexuality. And somebody sent that article to the superintendent of the Vestal School District, which he's no longer there. And he called me into his office, and he slid across the table to me this Dignity of All Students Act, and he looked at me and he said, "We don't need people like you in our school district." And I said, and I went home. It was very difficult for my wife and I, and we were actually in the process of suing the Vestal School District, because there's really three things that I believe will lead to change in any school district. One is prayer. A lot of times people in the church, they don't understand the power, the authority, the honor to come before the living God, to corporately agree together that God is going to bring change. And if the church in America would treat prayer as a priority, instead of we have an emergency, now we have to pray, but we were actually a house of prayer, we would see dynamic change across this country like never before. The second thing is parents. Number one, parents getting involved and having their voice heard at school board meetings. Because a lot of times what happens is parents are silent. They don't think they have any power. They have more power than they understand. The other thing is, in the public school system, is educators who are Christians standing up and saying, "I'm not going to stand for this anymore." Because I worked with Christian educators, and what you worry about is like, what's going to have my job? And that's the fear you run into. But then the third thing is litigation. And there is a organization called the Alliance of Defending Freedom. And when you are in these situations and your constitutional rights are being impacted, the greatest way change is made in America is in the court system. Because the minute you as a parent or as an employee say to a school district, "I am now going to sue you," it changes the ballgame. And one of the things that when I went through this thing with Vestal, I worked with the Alliance Defending Freedom. We had every right to sue them. We didn't go through with it, and to this day, I regret that. And I said to the Lord, I said, "You give me another opportunity with another platform, I will say and do whatever you want." Because one of the things I know is God wants to bring change in this country. And the way change is going to happen is with ordinary, everyday Americans who love Jesus Christ, who says we're not going to stand for this stuff anymore. And one of the driving forces for me, having Bridget come in here, is that I really feel as a church in America, we have failed to equip the church for the battle that stands in front of it. And the reason I believe we have failed is we are more concerned with the size of our buildings and how many campuses we have and how much we're loved as pastors, instead of taking on the mindset of Elijah and John the Baptist and saying, no matter what, we're going to preach and we're going to proclaim the truth. So one of the things I would say to everybody in this room, yes, you look at this and it can be overwhelming. It really where I feel we are as a country is the second American Revolution. The first American Revolution, normal everyday citizens looked at the British Empire and said, there is no way we can be free. But this nation was founded out of a place of prayer. Our founding fathers got together, and before they ever penned the Constitution, before they ever wrote the Declaration of Independence, they prayed and sought the living God, and then God gave them wisdom to give them the greatest document that has ever existed in human history. So I truly believe if you are somebody, you're concerned, understand you're not the only one. And the enemy wants us to believe we're isolated. We're not. And the problem also with what I see with a lot of this stuff is the loudest voice in America is the minority. Because there was just a thing that came out. There was a hockey player during a game would not wear a Pride jersey. And because he took a stand and said, I'm not, because he's Russian Orthodox, he said, I'm not going to stand for this. I'm not going to wear this jersey. His jersey is now the highest selling jersey in the United States because people, courage is courageous. And a lot of times for change to happen, it takes one person. But once one person stands up and says, I'm not doing this anymore, change will come. So I just want to encourage you guys in this room. God wants to do something, and what God is looking for is just like he asked Isaiah, who will go for us? And God is looking across this nation. He's looking at ordinary, everyday people. And so much of what she is presenting, being educated on the law, being educated when you're talking to lawyers, because again, what is going to get the attention of any school district is when lawyers start getting involved, because that's a whole different thing.
I forgot my question.
All right, any other questions? All right, I think this break we're going to have lunch too.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know how many of you, but I'm hungry and I like pizza. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to take a little bit of an extended break so people can eat. So all I'm going to ask is just give us time to set up the pizza in that window back there, and then once we get it set up, you guys can come back. You can grab some. And again, as a pastor here, I just want to thank all of you for coming today and just being part of this.